I now am going to invite our panellists up to the stage, and I'll invite them one by one in no preferential order, of course, but we will start off with Luke Johnson. If you're happy to come up, please, Luke. And Luke is a writer who's always called Geelong home and is now settled in Ocean Grove. And Luke is a fan of literary fiction, crime fiction, and strong Australian-facing narratives, characters and overtones, so you would have enjoyed the poem. His debut novel, King Tide, was released last month. Welcome, Luke. And Kate Halfpenny has spent 4 decades telling other people's stories as an award-winning writer, editor and commentator for Who, Vogue, Marie Claire and ABC Radio. Her own plot twists include 3 kids, 2 husbands and 1 mission to talk honestly about midlife as a columnist for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Post-pandemic, Kate fled Melbourne for Ocean Grove, where she boogie boards daily and has become unafraid of magpies. Welcome, Kate. And also on our panel today is Miranda Luby. Welcome back, Miranda, to the Geelong Regional Libraries. Miranda is an author, journalist and copywriter living on our surf coast. She's won several awards for her short stories, and her journalism features in publications such as National Geographic, BBC Travel and the New York Post. Miranda was shortlisted for the Text Prize for her debut young adult novel, Sadie Starr's Guide to Starting Over. Her second novel, The Edge of Everything, was published in April this year. Welcome, Miranda. And today's discussion will be chaired by our friend of the libraries, Abigayle Carmody. Abigayle is currently working on the final stage of a novel, soon to be published by Text Publishing. Her short stories are featured in various anthologies, and Abigayle has been shortlisted for a number of awards. Over to you, Abigayle, and thank you for leading our first panel discussion for the day. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is working? Don't think so. No? Yes. Hi everyone. I'm delighted to be here today for Geelong's local word session, My New Book, with our wonderful 3 authors here, Miranda, Luke and Kate. So over the next hour, we're going to be talking about how each author approaches their work, with a particular focus on their writing practice, finding their voice, and about their publishing journey. You're going to hear 3 very different approaches, from listening to rock and roll while writing, to what a crime writer can envisage on a coastal walk, and letting subconscious thoughts roll out on the keyboard. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm just going to give a little quick overview of their new books. Miranda Luby, as Vanessa said, her first book was Sadie Starr's Guide to Starting Over, and her recent one, The Edge of Everything, is a profoundly moving and witty book at the same time, and it's about grief and friendship and romance and an endangered bird. And it's also about her lovable young protagonist questioning life's deeper meaning. Kate Halfpenny's Boogie Wonderland is called a memoir on the cover, but I think Kate might have another definition for you. Kate's book is hilarious, heartfelt and courageous. And it's about making a sea change, marriage, addiction, dealing with many sea changes at once. And I think it's a lot about love as well. And Luke Johnson's King Tide is a gripping crime fiction novel that with a cast of very compelling characters. It's very sensitive and gritty, and it's set in a small coastal town that Luke brings so much to life you can almost smell the tang of the southerly wind to Luke. So we've got 3 authors, 3 genres, and 3 very different journeys. Just before we start, there will be time for questions at the end. So now let's talk about getting started. Putting the wellspring of your ideas and your thoughts and your memories which you may have been mulling around for some time, into words, which has been a very different process for each of you. Miranda, the wellspring of your writing is adolescence. And it's also about exploring existential questions that are important to you. And so with this in mind, when you have the genesis of your book and you're exploring existential questions, how much do you know about your book when you get started?
Very little. Is this working?
Yeah, is it?
Yes, very little. I think I know a lot. And then as I begin the writing process, it turns out I know basically nothing. So I sort of, go in one direction and then quite quickly realise the book wants to do something entirely different. But generally I start with a question I'm trying to answer, and for me with both of those books that's been questions from my teenage years that I never really answered for myself. Questions, those big sort of questions about meaning and how we're supposed to live in this world, things that I've had to figure out later in life as we often do. And so the exploration of those questions, that journey has been the writing of the novel, and often it's not till I get to the end that I figure out, that's what I thought about that. I had no idea.
Yeah, last time you were here, you said you used a Flannery O'Connor quote that said, "I don't know what I think until I write it."
Yeah, absolutely. I think writing is a form of deep thinking, and I think that's the big thing with AI. That there's many challenges with AI in the future, but I think when we lose that ability to write through our feelings and thoughts and ideas, then we do lose the ability to live an examined life, and we lose a lot of things with that. So yeah, that's what writing's about for me.
Thanks, Miranda. Kate, I'm going to talk in more detail about your publishing journey and your second book later, because that's a story in itself. But I want to start with, I need to sort of begin with your publisher, because it was your publisher's idea for you to write your book. So can you tell us about your initial response to the brief that they sent you for that book? Because you said you felt like it was just there.
The book was just there?
Yeah, that like you just sat down like a professional and said about.
I did, and it was, I'm 60 next year, so this is my debut, which feels astonishing, but I have been writing professionally for 40 years for newspapers and magazines, and so when a firm came to me and said, "We love your writing and we love this particular column that you've written," which was about my husband and I moving from Collingwood to Ocean Grove after COVID, and then deciding a couple of years later that we needed a toehold back in the city, that life by the sea wasn't all that it was cracked up to be or that we thought it was. And so when a firm came to me and said, "Do you want to have a crack at this?" I thought, yeah, I do. I can do this. And I plotted out that I would write my 70,000 words in 35 days. I thought I can easily crank out 2,000 words a day, and 2 years later, here I am.
So you said that it just poured out of you. You did a chapter outline. You know how to structure story. You said, and you said, "Yeah, I've got this."
I did. The chapter outline itself only took me about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, it just poured out to me. I sent it off to the publisher, who said, "This looks fantastic," and actually said, "I'm sending this to my wife, and I've never done that before, but I think she's going to get a real kick out of this book. It sounds great." So it all just seemed really easy until it wasn't.
Oh, well, we've got a story to tell there. Luke, I'd imagine crime fiction would require some planning, but for you, character starts you off, and you need to have your characters in place. Why is it that characters need to get you started? How do they get you started?
Yeah, so I think what I enjoy reading over my lifetime has always been character-based, and so it just naturally carries the story for me. Or for me, when I'm reading something I'm really enjoying, it's the characters during and certainly at the end of the book when I reflect on it that I have enjoyed the journey of. So I guess it's just a natural thing when I started to write more meaningfully. So what turned out to be King Tide was my fourth manuscript, and by that stage I had sort of derived a process that seemed to work for me, and it was, it is led by characters. I've often got a plot or 2 or 3 or 4 points of a plot worked out in a similar time frame over 4 or 6 months as I'm sort of getting things together before I start writing. But it's always, I like to have the characters, a bit like what Miranda said before, the characters' choices inform the plot more so than the plot is there and the characters have to mould around that, I guess is how I approach it.
And are your characters evolving and changing as you get deeper into the story?
Yeah, naturally. Yeah, I think their relationships with each other in the story end up telling the reader and as a writer more about them than you realise as you're writing it, maybe. So I do sit with them for a long time. I tend to be, 4 or 6 or 8 months just with thoughts and lots of notes before I'll start to write. So they're generally fairly well formed before I start the manuscript itself, but naturally they continue to evolve as I write. Yeah.
Oh, you've got a really bad character in there too. I wonder how he sort of mulled over in your mind. So let's talk about voice, because it's that really hard to define thing, isn't it? That ephemeral, hard to define thing called voice. And it's the style, it's the rhythm, it's the tone, not just of your characters or your narrative voice for a memoir, but it's the tone of the whole book, isn't it? So I love what author George Saunders says about voice, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says that we already have a collection of voices, a chorus, so to speak, that are, many different selves, many different experiences that we've had over a lifetime that we can draw on and express in unique ways. Miranda, you're used to writing in first person with your columns, and Edge of Everything is written in first person from a teenager's point of view. And lovable Lucy is so fresh and alive, her voice on the page. It really leaps off the page. How do you manage to capture that authentic teenage voice?
I actually just went with the voice that was most natural to me. So when I first started, wanting to write a novel, what I did was write many, many short stories in a variety of voices. One being the voice of a 50-year-old male farmer, one being the voice of a robot in the future. I really didn't know what I was going to write, and a few of them being teenagers, and sent all these stories out into the world. And what came back, what won competitions, and was responded to in a really well with these teenage voices. So it seemed that came quite naturally to me, and I knew from feedback that was, the star that I should be working with. I still don't feel like I'm that far from a teenager, like age-wise I am, but we've all been teenagers. We know what it's like to have those massive feelings, for everything to be dramatic, to ask these huge questions, and I think we can all access that. Some it's a little bit closer to their everyday life than others, and I just feel I still have that teenager inside me that really has a lot to say and a lot to question. So yeah, that's my voice, and I roll with it.
Yeah, it's very authentic. But your bedroom's not like Lucy's, is it?
Oh, no.
She was just entombed in this messy bedroom, wasn't she?
Yeah, she's having some big feelings. She can't put away a cereal bowl in that moment. No, but no, no crusty cereal bowls. I do my own washing now. It's fine.
Luke, in your acknowledgements, you give a nod to the influence of the other authors who've helped you in evolving your voice. What have they taught you?
Probably nothing conscious, I guess. It's just what you absorb as you read. And I think, you sort of write what you know, or like Miranda was saying, whatever's closest to the surface, whatever you relate to most closely tends to come out with the most authenticity, I guess. So, people like Jack Kerouac and Tim Winton that I love, and I've read, all of their stuff multiple times, just sort of somehow creep into your fabric as a writer, I guess. And it's a natural way to write what you've loved reading, I guess. The other quote regarding voice that I love is Miles Davis, the jazz musician, has a quote along the lines of, someone asked him about his trumpet sound at one stage, and how he was very recognisable, and he said it took him a lot of years, like all of us up here, I'm sure, and his quote was something along the lines of, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself. I think that's where, when you have multiple manuscripts or a lifetime of writing for these guys, that you end up just finding the rhythm and the tone and the voice that comes naturally, and that tends to be what people respond to when they're reading, I think.
You did the same, Miranda. You talked about that last time, about you emulated other writers until your own voice shone through.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to start somewhere, and most writers are avid readers, and so I think that's just a natural choice. But it takes time. You've got to be patient.
Yeah. Kate, you've developed a very strong, clear voice in your columns and had many years of experience. But I'm wondering what it was like for you going from a 700-word column to a 70,000-something word book that draws on a range of emotions and experiences and different stages in your journey as well.
And the first step, if we can just cycle back a tiny bit, is the change that I made in writing the column in 2021 when The Age got in touch and said, do you want to have a crack at this? And again, I thought, yes, I will have a go at it. I was in that stage of saying yes to everything. And that was initially really hard because I'd had 4 decades of, my job was to keep myself out of the story. I was always a feature writer. I sucked at hard news even as an 18-year-old cadet in my Laura Ashley outfit. I could never get the hang of that. It never made sense to me, but I could write features, no problem. But the work was quite prescriptive, which was a good thing. So to actually have that, write a column in your voice was fantastic. It was quite liberating and it was a new opportunity. I felt like I was reinventing myself in my mid-50s. And so, yes, I was really lucky that the book that was commissioned was an extension of that. I didn't have to find characters. I didn't have to come up with plots because a lot of what I was writing about was actually happening in real time. But certainly I had days where I thought, how can I spin this out into the book that's required? And again, I think that it was either luck or bad luck that I had a lot of things happen to me over the journey, which I was able to include in the story as relevant to what I was trying to portray about this stage that I was at, that I found myself in midlife as an empty nester, going through perimenopause without an actual job for the first time since I was 18, with a marriage in free fall, having already lost another one. There was a lot to pack in there.
Yeah, it just, because there's, your narrative voice changes from witty to thoughtful to sad, and you're also reflecting on past selves too, aren't you, in a way? I know it's all you, but there's a really interesting part of the book where you're working for that organisation, and you sort of felt like you were a little bit removed from yourself, and so you're reflecting on a past experience in your current voice.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you for pointing that out to me. A lot of it I still look at, and I haven't managed to read the book again since I wrote it because it felt so gruelling and exhilarating and terrible while I was writing it. But the particular chapters about the group that I worked for called Xland, which is the closest thing I've ever come to joining a cult, and it was sort of purely by accident really, or I was, greedy. I had to see a psychologist while I was writing those chapters because I just found it really hard to work out what had happened to me in that time and that place. It was very, very hard to go back there. It was something that I had hoped to put behind me, and when I realised that I had to put it in the book, it was super hard, but I'm glad that I did because I do think that those chapters provide some context about, why we needed to escape from the city.
Yeah, it did, and it sort of draws back on that George Saunders quote that you can draw on different past experiences and different selves to express different stages in your life journey, whether it be memoir or whether it be a teenager in fiction. I don't know about crime writers. Have you got sort of?
Well, yeah, I guess all different versions of yourself come through.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about getting stuck? There's not a writer around who doesn't get stuck at some point. You get a little sticky bit in the narrative or the story and you just don't know, where to go from here. You've got an interesting strategy for getting stuck. What's that?
I literally type out the words, what I want to say is. I just type that and then I know what I want to say. So, I will be stuck for maybe 10 seconds and then I type those words and I'm stuck. You type those
words out.
Like it works. I can guarantee you if you want to have a crack at it, if you're writing and you're stuck, just write what I want to say is and just go with it. It's there in your mind. Yeah, don't self-edit, just get it out.
What do you do when you get stuck, Miranda?
It's interesting. I was just thinking about possibly the difference between fiction and non-fiction, because if I'm writing non-fiction, I think, you just got to access that place in you that knows already what you want to say, and I think that I'm going to use that tactic because that's very helpful. But with fiction, if I'm stuck, it's often a plot point, and I don't know what to do, even because it might just be like a structural problem, and do I have to go back and change this or change that? So for me, it's the opposite. It's just time, going for a walk, all those sorts of things, letting your brain work on a problem while you're away from the desk, and you just think it's never going to happen, I'm never going to get unstuck, and then all of a sudden it comes flooding in and you race to the desk, or to, you're on your phone typing, this happens and this happens. So it's just, for me, that patience and faith in the process, and once it's happened to you a few times, you go, I got unstuck before, it happened, I didn't even really do anything, my brain was working on it while I was away from the desk, and so just having that faith that you will get there with a plot point. But also, I'm going to try that. That's
Luke, you rarely get stuck. You've got to tell us what your writing desk looks like and about these notes that you have.
Yeah, I guess I do get stuck in small ways. I tend to have, like hundreds and hundreds of notes before I start. So that is about character, about plot, about things. And I might only use a third of them, during the process of writing it. But because I've got so many ideas that might or might not work, and some of them almost within the first few days become irrelevant because it's already heading somewhere different than that idea would have fitted. But they do come as a great bank of ideas. So if I get to a point where, which happens of course all the time, where I need something to occur, like Miranda was saying, for the story to move forward and to have pace but to keep some intrigue, often I'll have 4 or 5 different plot points, or even settings that might infer things about a plot point, and I just choose which one seems to fit the best. I don't like, some people in a first draft just like to get things out and can always go back and massage it and work on it some more. I tend to be a bit pedantic. I tend to want the one that, particularly for the more important parts, where if I read it, that someone else has written it, that I wouldn't scoff or say it's not good enough even from a starting point. Because I feel like if I start to just make things just good enough even in the first draft, that it loses the momentum of having the pace and having the depth of character and things that I want to read. So I think sometimes it just flows. Sometimes I'll have to go for a walk, is my classic way. Print off my pages of notes and go through them again and highlight the ones that might have been dismissed 3 weeks ago, but all of a sudden in this new scenario, maybe now it's going to work. So I think it's having a really big bank of ideas.
Have you got your notes in stacks around you, or what have you?
They are.
Rifling through them when you get stuck?
There's never enough room on the desk. So I have my computer and I have my various bits and bobs, and I like to have all of, I'll circle and highlight and cross. I have all these different little codes for which ones are going to be relevant where, and whether they're character or plot or setting. So I tend to, it's probably 25 sheets of paper that I try and place individually around. So it's a bloody mess, that's for sure.
The great earlier 20th century crime writer Dorothy Sayers, her notes are archived in libraries, and they have green for plot, red for murderer, and purple for victim. Are yours colour-coded?
No, they're not. They're more symbols, yeah.
Oh, right, symbols.
Yeah, across a triangle and a circle.
And what's the triangle and circle mean?
So one's for plot point, one's for character, and one's for setting. Yeah,
just
so my eyes get drawn to it if I'm looking for a particular thing, that I can kind of find them more quickly. It still takes a long time at times, but I'll eventually sort my way through.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Everyone has such a different approach. I want to talk about writing routines. Because we can't all be like the acclaimed writer Haruki Murakami, who sees writing as survival training, and he gets up at 4 a.m, writes for 6 hours, and goes for a 10k run. But Kate, you get to the gym first. Can you tell us about your writing routine? You're working out first, and then you proceed into your day, and what the soundtrack is to your book.
Yeah, I do work out first, gym every day, and then a big dog walk with my beautiful Groodle Sally. And then I treat the writing day like a working day. I like to be at my desk. It's later these days, sort of 9:30. I usually put on clothes that I would have worn to work back in the day. I still like to put on a heel if I'm trip-trotting out to my converted garage office in the backyard. Yeah, I do. I do. It's just, I feel comfortable like that because I spent so many decades wearing that kind of stuff to work. So I feel weird and I feel blocked if I don't actually still have that on. So I go off and do that, sit down, and I'm starting to wonder now if I actually know how to write at all because I have no notes anywhere. I did not have a single printed out page with anything on it. What I do have on my desk is, and I'm still doing it a year later, it's a paint by numbers of a giant slice of lasagna. And if I'm feeling bored or if I'm feeling like I just need to decompress for half an hour, I paint a bit of the lasagna slice. I'm getting closer to finishing it. And I always write with music. I can't write if I'm in silence. So I love, there's a couple of Gang of Youths albums which I put on. I really love listening to those while I write, and it's funny, I've probably heard each album now 600 times because I got into kind of a rhythm listening to them when I started writing the manuscript, and I became maybe superstitious that if I didn't have that particular music on that I wouldn't be able to keep going. So it's kind of chaotic. I'm doing my paint by numbers. I've got the dog running in and out. I've got my husband probably saying, "Do we need bread?" And I've got the music on. So it's not, it works for me.
Oh, I think that's a great picture, isn't it? We've got Kate in the converted garage with her heels on, with rock and roll going, with a little paint by pictures next to her, the dog at her feet. Great, lovely. What about you, Miranda? What's your writing routine?
I'm going to paint a very, very different picture. There's certainly no heels. I couldn't imagine putting on heels to write myself, so I love that glamorous image. I wake up and the sooner I'm touching the keys, the better. Like literally I could drag my laptop off the carpet on the floor and it's still dark, I've barely put the light on, I'm in my pyjamas, like I haven't even got up to get the coffee yet and start typing straight away. For me, the closer I am to sort of that dream state, especially for a first draft, the better, because then I find that I have less self-doubt, less questioning, and it's more able to access that, what do I really want to say? That part of me that really wants to write this book is closer to the surface, that sort of dreaming part that has this big idea for the book. So yeah, I'm straight into it as early as possible, and then I'll get my coffee, and then by the afternoon it's all over. There's no way that I'm getting back to the desk, and that's when I'll do my sort of real day job work, and that's when I can write, columns and nonfiction, the sort of thing that I've been doing for much longer. So yeah, I'm pajamas and half asleep and a coffee for me. But yeah.
And silence?
And silence, absolutely.
So you get out of your pajamas when you start doing your professional writing?
Yeah, that's true actually. When I do feel like I'm going to my job, I finally get out of my pajamas. But yeah, silence for me. I can work, when you've worked many years as a journo, you have to be able to work anywhere and in a cafe and that sort of thing. But yeah, if I'm writing a first draft of fiction, silence is preferable. And yes, there's no one asking for bread in my house.
You should be. What a contrast between the two of you. Luke, you squeeze writing in between your physio practice and family commitments a few nights a week, but you get an enormous amount done.
Yeah, I tend to, I tend to save up all these ideas we were talking about before I start a manuscript, and I don't start writing it until I know I've got a block of time, because I definitely need some momentum initially. So normally, or invariably actually, it's been a caravan trip with the family of 3 or 4 or 5 weeks most of the last 5 years. So yeah, I save them all up. I get myself really familiar with the main parts as I get closer to the trip. It's like building up this sort of momentum internally. And then I'll normally write in the evenings when we're on our holiday, sometimes through the day, but I tend to find I write better and more, it comes easier to me at night when the kids are in bed and things. So yeah, I tend to write, 30 or 40 or 50,000 words in a month that we're away for.
Wow.
And then once I've got that momentum, generally the story's forming and the notes become increasingly handy to, pad out what I need to. So yeah, then I try and devote often an evening or two through the week. That doesn't always happen. Our 2 daughters swim a lot, so I've got the Saturday morning role for that. My wife Cara does 95% of it through the week. So I'm normally sitting, to be honest, down here at the pier. The girls are at the pool by sort of 6:30 and they don't finish till 10:30. So I've got a 4-hour block then where I'll be in my passenger seat of my car with some McDonald's, just kind of bashing away most Saturday mornings to keep that momentum going. And as it gets closer to the end of a manuscript for a first draft, I'm sure you guys have had the same experience. It tends to be more... more energy comes and you're really looking to finish off every part. I mean, I like the whole lot of it, but the last sort of 20% is when the energy really comes to make sure you're sort of nailing every part that you have built up to.
That's incredible, haven't we? We've got Luke in the car with McDonald's. It's in the dark. And we've got Miranda in the dark in her pyjamas. And we've got Kate in her converted garage in her heels. That's great. So are you researching as you go, or are you dedicating time for research?
For me, there isn't a huge amount of research for mine.
Not with those notes.
No, correct. Although there's often points. So when in King Tide, the initial scene is a body's revealed in the sand, and so I did research quite a bit the rate of change of degradation depending on the temperature there, how deep the body was, and to make it absolutely realistic that when it is revealed after 3 years, it is how it should have been. The forensic medicine stuff that is through mine a little bit. I love that part, being a sort of healthcare worker. All of the detail of the forensic anatomy and things I just love. So I did research that quite heavily just to make sure it was true and authentic.
Could you tell the audience what sort of things you do envisage when you go from a walk, if you get stuck and go for a walk? What sort of things do you see in sand dunes?
So most of the time when I'm walking, I am, I'm living in the mind of one of the characters. So I'll step out the front door 6 nights out of 7, and tonight I'm Tate, and so I'm listening to what other people are saying if they're around me. I'm looking at things on the ground. I'm just trying to be. I think it's a bit like method acting. I don't actually know if it is exactly, but I feel like I inhabit these characters for so long before I start, and then during that they do have this kind of authenticity about them, because I could kind of have any conversation or any situation they might find themselves in, for the main characters that is. I genuinely feel like I could predict and be very much them at any moment. So that's often where I am when I'm walking.
Well, we want to get to that point where you're on a coastal walk on a town we won't name. But what did you envisage on this coastal walk in the sand?
What I envisaged?
Yeah.
We can say where it is. It's Port Fairy.
Oh, we're allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Okay, but
yeah.
So you go for a walk, and a writer might be sort of thinking about, I have to unravel that plot, but you look in the sand dunes and see what?
Well, there was a leg sticking out.
A dead body.
Point, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yes, not all of us would go for a walk and sort of and imagine something like that. But I guess that's the mindset of a crime writer.
Yeah, well, I think if you've genuinely seen it and have felt it, it just makes it that much easier to describe, I think, yeah.
Now let's steer down the publishing road, because it's all been a very different experience for all of you. Miranda, you had your first big break with text publishing being shortlisted, and then after being shortlisted, you were offered a book deal. Last time you were here, you said that you found the editing process really challenging and that there was a lot of reworking and replotting. What did you bring from that experience into your second book?
The idea that if you've done it once, you can do it again. So, if you don't know, you write your book, send it off to a publisher, and they say, oh, we love it, we're going to publish it, but you have to go through the editing process. And what you get first back is these structural edits. Basically, your editor saying, we'd like to change this, and for me it was, we'd like to rewrite the entire ending, we'd like to have a completely different setting, which was really overwhelming. And when I first got these structural edit notes, I burst into tears, because I thought, there's no way that I can, rewrite this whole thing. I've done it once, and how can I possibly? And of course, you do it, you manage it. It's much better because they know what they're talking about, these professional editors, and you're so glad that you went through the process. And so the next time, it's just as difficult technically. You have to do all the work again. But I just kept coming back to the fact that I did it last time, it worked, the book was so much better, I can do it again. So that having that under your belt is the great part of a second book. You know, you've done it once. So yeah, but it's always tricky, the editing process. You feel very vulnerable. You sort of you feel like you're starting from scratch again sometimes when you've worked so hard to get your book to a certain point. But, you know, you do always end up with a stronger manuscript, and it's very satisfying in the end. So, yeah, it's, you know, you look forward to that point where you know you're going to look back and think, wow, look how far it's come.
Can I just ask, sorry,
Go on.
Abigayle, did you write the second manuscript first draft closer to where the first one ended up, Miranda? Like, as in, did you write closer to what you knew they were looking for the second time around?
Of the second book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I still had a terrible ending. Endings are not my thing. And I knew as I was writing it that, once again, I'm not nailing this ending. I'm doing what I did the first time. But I knew that I had the same editor and that she would be able to see through, you know, what I was doing to what I needed to do. So, yeah, I did find it hard to predict what they wanted. So I thought, I'll just do what I did, what's in my heart, and then hoping this editor will understand what I was trying to do, which she did. So yeah, I mean, endings are difficult for most people, but they're definitely not my thing.
So it's interesting because you said that your editor is the only person that needs to fall in love with it.
Yeah, I don't have beta readers. I don't send my work to anybody else. My editor's the first person that reads it. This is not necessarily advice that I would give to every writer, but that's what I do. It's not that I'm precious about my work. It's just you do only need an editor to buy your book. You only need one person to fall in love with it. And I trust her opinion. And I just also trusted that she could see through the mistakes I was making to the book that it could be. And so, you know, it's not like I knew it didn't need to be perfect for her to be able to, you know, get behind it and buy it. So, yeah, when you have that person, sometimes it's best just to go straight to them rather than confusing yourself with lots of different advice.
Yeah, you said that last time. I think it's interesting. Luke, how did you go from being a physio with a few manuscripts in your drawer in May to having a book deal in August? And what role Mark Smith, the author Mark Smith, played in you helping you get published?
Yeah, so mine was a unique journey. I had written 3 manuscripts between 2019 and 2022, and whilst ultimately I was wanting them or thinking I might pursue publishing, it wasn't something I was doing at that point. I was just loving writing so much and still do that, you know, to put the time into pursuing publishing when I didn't know anybody in the industry just felt like that was time I would rather spend writing. So I wrote the 4th manuscript. But yeah, essentially there was an auction, an online literary auction where you bid for certain prizes, and one of them was a manuscript assessment by a fellow called Mark Smith, who lives down in Anglesey and has had 3 really good YA books, and his first adult novel came out at the end of last year called 3 Boys Gone. And so Mark, the prize was a full manuscript assessment, and so I won that auction. And I sent it off to Mark, just to kind of get an idea of whether in 5 to 10 years, when I had sort of envisaged pursuing publishing more, with more effort, whether I was in the ballpark. Really was all I was looking for. But Mark was really kind. He did a lot more than he needed to, essentially, in that process. He enjoyed the read, he gave me lots of advice, and he had this sort of carrot. It was 110,000 words at that point, and a book really needs to be closer to 80 for a publisher to consider a debut author. So he sort of said, if you get it close to 80,000 words and keep the bones of the story there, then he would pass it on to his agent, which he duly did, a guy called Dan Pilkington in Sydney, and Dan liked it too. Dan took it to a publisher, which was Affirm, the first publisher Dan took it to, took it on. So yeah, it was very, very fast. It was unexpected, really, I guess, and it's been a crazy process. I mean, I've loved every minute of it, but it has been a real whirlwind in that time. It's all new to me.
Yeah, you said that you were blissfully naive about the editing process. You sent them off sort of 90-something thousand words. They came back to you with 58,000 and you had to build it up again to 85 in 4 weeks.
Yes, it was brutal. It was the most, I was saying to these
brutal
guys...
was the word you used,
Yeah,
that's right.
It was so I just didn't know what to expect. I didn't know that existed. I mean, they had bought the manuscript that was that, and I thought we might change the odd word here or there, and I might have missed a comma, but so I had literally I had no idea that what was in, and the original manuscript was in 4 different timelines. And I just wrote it in a peculiar way, unbeknownst to me. So, yeah, they sort of sent it back, having cut 40% of it, which I don't think is all that uncommon, but it seemed particularly harsh at the time. And so I was at a swimming competition in Mildura, and I was just saying to these guys before, I've never felt more despondent and annoyed and just gutted and filthy at the world and questioning whether... Miranda said the same thing to me, they've acquired what they've acquired, why do they want to make it so different? So all those things, which is so lovely to hear that it's a really common response. In fact, I think I emailed the editor once I gave it a couple of days so I didn't email the wrong thing. And I used angry and despondent and a third term, I can't remember what that was. And she emailed back and said, Luke, that's exactly how I want you to be feeling. That's normal. So that means we know we've got our part right. And then, essentially, I was given 4 weeks, or might have been 5 weeks, to reconstruct it from the 57,000 words that it was, and 4 time frames of being compressed into 2, which meant a lot of the nuances in crime that I dropped in purposefully. Every chapter had bits and pieces that were so important to me to give hints or to have the story go a certain way. So it wasn't only less words, they'd rearranged, the last third was now the middle third, and there were big gaps between them that I had to find a way to write to. So it was really, really overwhelming. But it did, the one big positive to come out of it was I was able to see, what I felt was that when they'd taken not just some of the story away, which is perfectly normal, as it turns out, but they'd taken some of the writing that I really liked that I'd written.
So they killed a few of your darlings, did they?
They did, and that was the part probably that got me the most, but because it forced me then to rewrite and essentially gave me the confidence that I could pull that writing out again when I needed to, was the best thing that could have happened by so far. So it's been the making of me in a confident sense to be able to be comfortable to step up and write what I want to write, and to get, more importantly, to get rid of things. I was doing another one of these a little while ago, and I used the term, the words were getting in the way of the story. I think for me that was what was happening, and again I think it's pretty common probably. But it was a great lesson and gave me all the confidence in the world that I probably needed.
And pretty tough experiences, aren't they? And Kate, here's your story, because you were, as we said earlier, were approached by the publishers to write your book. You got it off to them within the deadline. And then they got back in touch with you about that first draft, and I want you to tell me about that, if you don't mind sharing that, and what your response was and what followed.
I hope I can remember now. I've blocked a lot of it out because it was so traumatic. Prompt me if there's bits that you want to talk about.
Brutal as well.
Definitely brutal, totally excoriating. Like I wanted to, go jump off the Westgate. I'm someone who has written effortlessly for decades. I started in 85 as an 18-year-old. So I know how to use words. They make sense for me. And when I sent off my first manuscript, everything had been super easy. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have to pitch my thing. I didn't even have a book at that stage. My idea of writing a book was that I would occasionally go into bookshops and look around and see books by other journos that I knew could not write for toffee. I've seen their real stuff and I think, what? You've got a book? And I would sort of go out feeling...
I've got this.
Yeah, totally. So I think that it was definitely ego-driven when they said, do you want to write a book? It was like, yeah, I want to have a go at it and see how great I am at it. So when I hit send on, the first draft of it, and I didn't even know that there were going to be multiple drafts. I had no idea about the publishing process. I did not know about beta
blissfully
readers.
naive like Luke was.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. I remember queuing up Aerosmith, Don't Want to Miss a Thing, which is the song that my kids sing at parties, and I'd fall backwards off furniture onto them. And, it was this big moment for me. I was crying and I was singing that song, the yeah, and I hit the thing and thought, I have finished with this book business. How easy was that? But it took a little while. That was early December, mid-December, talking about 2023, I think. I can't even remember. I think that must have been it. And when I got the feedback, it was just, I was so devastated. The words that have stuck with me are not self-aware, not funny, not self-effacing. I think it was like that. I was like, what? This is my shtick when I'm writing. Like, this is the only thing I know how to write. I was pretty furious. And like you, I had to sort of like think, have they sent it to the wrong person? Anyway.
You sent off an email too, didn't you?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With words like angry and...
I
Did you
don't
use the word angry?
No, I think I put surprised.
Surprised.
It means angry.
Yeah, I am surprised by this feedback.
Yeah.
But ultimately it was interesting, you know, like when I had worked through it and they said, let's set up a meeting and we'll talk you through what we think needs to change. The changes, funnily enough, weren't all that great. The major criticism was that they felt for someone who was writing a memoir that I was like a Teflon person. It would be like, oh, I had to identify my dead grandmother's body, and then I would bounce back up from that and go on to, oh, I had really terrible postnatal psychosis. Oh, I got made redundant. My husband left me. They said, we felt like you're a Teflon person just bouncing back up from these things that were happening to you. And at that stage, my response was, because I am a woman and this was what we have to do. This is what we do in life. We really don't have time to absorb these things that are happening to us. I didn't have a luxury, you know, the luxury of time or space or money to have a full-blown breakdown. I just had to keep going. So initially I was like, that makes no sense to me. But fortunately, I got my ego in check, which was the problem, and thought, you have never written a book or published a book, you do not know what you're talking about, and these guys do it all the time for a living. So yes, I managed after 3 months to get myself in check, listen to what they were saying, make the requisite changes, which fortunately, as I say, they wanted something that was in the middle of the book to come to the front and something at the front to go into the middle. They wanted the focus to be more on me. I spoke to a girlfriend, a trusted girlfriend. I sent her the manuscript at that stage. She read it and she said, you are trying too hard to be funny. They are right in that you're not really writing. She said, write hard, write raw, write real. And I did. And I found that second draft really easy. And I know when I've written something, if it's good, I get a little tingle at the back of my neck. And I had it with the second draft. And I set that off again.
With rock and roll music and
same Aerosmith, yeah, I had my husband there with me. And, you know, when I sent it and I was sobbing, like I said, I think it's really good this time. And we, funnily enough, he's like, I'm not going down this road again where you are devastated and moping around and can't go into a bookshop for months. So the next day we went off to Bali for 6 nights as a little circuit breaker. And while I was there, Martin Hughes, who had by then moved on from a firm, he'd sold the company, he emailed me and he said, I'm no longer attached to the project, but I've read it. He did say he'd just had surgery and he was under deep in the good drugs, he said. He's mired in the good drugs, but he said, it's brilliant and I love it and congratulations. And I was reading that on a lounger by the pool at some resort, and it was just like, oh, I'm so glad I was not this egotistical idiot and I actually listened to what the experts said. It was a really good moment.
So all of you involved quite a bit of angst, didn't it? You know, so given all of that, what all three of you have described, what do you think are qualities that a writer needs? Miranda?
Oh, yeah, definitely that persistence and stepping back from the ego is a big one. You know, being able to take advice from other people and see yourself, you know, take yourself out of the process a little bit and understand that really at the end of the day, this is for an audience. But yeah, the persistence, you know, as Luke said, it's a 4th manuscript that got published. It was my 3rd. That's the case with so many writers. And, you know, it's so difficult after that first one, you know, often gets rejected, or, you know, you've sent it to a friend and they didn't love it as much as you thought they might, or it's just you realise that, you know, 180,000 words is probably not going to be your first novel, and, you know, 12 timelines and you know, 14 voices and it's getting back to the drawing board again can be so difficult. But that's when you know you really want it. You know, you can, you know, in between when I wrote my first book and I knew that wasn't going to be it, and then I realised I had to go back to the beginning and start over with something fresh, I took about 3 or 4 months, not intentionally off, I just could not face the computer. And I thought that's probably it. I just can't imagine doing that again. But it drew me back. I couldn't help myself, and that's when you know, unfortunately, I'm going to have to do this all again. It's I'm possessed, and you get to the end again and again and again, and just keep doing it. So it's both sticking with it, but also just having that drive that comes naturally. I think that's when you really know that you're a writer. You can't help but tell stories.
And you'd invested so much into it, in it too. Then you just can't give up, really.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, that can be a double-edged sword. I think, we invest our identity in writing, and especially it's tricky if you tell people you're writing a book, of course, because it holds you accountable and that sort of thing, but then it becomes this thing that, oh, how's your book? And everyone knows you're writing it, it must be published soon, right? And you're like, oh, God, give me 20 years. So it's really difficult because you want to invest your whole self in this thing that you're so passionate about, but then you do need that little bit of distance as well, because if you get, if it's too much of your identity, then, you can't step away, and if the writing's not going well, then you're not happy at all, and no one wants to live with that. So, it's a very fine balancing act, I think.
So you're saying persistence is the key quality to have?
I think one of them for sure.
What about you, Kate? What do you think a good quality? You don't have another book? You got another?
No way. Nah, I've used all my stories. I've got nothing left to say. I found it excruciating, and exhilarating. I'm so rapt that I did it. I feel really proud that I was able to do it, and
it's a great read.
I thank you. I actually think it's good. I wouldn't change any of it. I think that you need. I think it is that lack of ego. That you really do have to surrender to the process and where it takes you. But I think it helps if you can write. I mean, that sounds really basic, but I think it helps.
Yeah. What about you, Luke? What do you think are the qualities a writer needs?
Yeah, I think probably patience. So a real want to do it. I mean, I think it is such a grueling process that, just having... Well, I think having a good idea for a story is obviously a great starting point, but it's not enough. You have to be able to tell that story in a way that a lot of people are going to want to connect with, and that's not easy. Having said that, I know Rick Rubin, the music producer, his favourite saying to say to musos in his studio is always that the audience comes last, which I don't think is what we're taught in school. It's not what I was taught in school. You wrote for an audience, and as you got older into the higher levels of high school, the audience became really important for certain aspects of writing, and no doubt that has some merit. But I think when you're writing, I don't know, for me, when I'm writing a story that you really want to tell and you think that is going to have connections and people are going to read it and take something from it, given it might be a connection to a character or a situation or a place that is described, that it has to be something you really love, or it's just too grueling to finish. I think a lot of people get to 10 or 20 or 30,000 words into a story even and sort of say to themselves, I'm not sure, both from the plot point of view, just from the effort required to keep on having outstanding writing that people are going to want to read. It's really difficult. So I think to be patient and let the words and the characters and the stories come to you. Don't try and force it. Wait until you know, when, like Kate was saying a minute ago, when you write something that you know is really good, I personally think you want that to be quite often, every chapter should have something in it that you go back and read it and say, that has weight, that's going to keep people wanting to move forward in the story. So I think being patient enough to let the story and the characters come to you, and then be patient enough to write it in a way that you would want to read again yourself, I think would be the most important part.
Can I jump in quickly? When I said it helps if you can write, I think that I want to expand on that and just say it helps if you can write honestly. Whatever you're writing about, do it with honesty, do it with authenticity, do with whatever you're feeling, because when you connect with that, the writing has something different about it, and readers will respond to that. I really found that in the columns. That was what surprised me most when I started writing them, that I was able to write about fist fighting with my sister-in-law on the front lawn and, vaginal atrophy and whatever it was that was happening to me at that time, and people responded to it because they can see themselves in those situations. So that would be my advice. You need to be able to be honest with yourself so that you can be honest with the reader.
Oh, that's good. Thanks you for adding that, Kate. Isn't it great, the conversations that they've had? These, the honesty that you've had in answering the questions too. The vulnerability that you expressed. When you were going through the editing process. Miranda burst into tears. Luke was at the pool feeling filthy.
That's the word.
You burst into tears too, didn't you?
Yeah, and I was just in disbelief, like, what?
Yeah. Who wants to be a writer? Okay, thank you. That was great. Really, thank you so much. And we've got some time for questions now from the audience. I'm hoping you've got some questions ready to ask these wonderful writers. So has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask?
Did you ever consider going down the self-publishing route, or were you always on a traditional publish?
Great question. Did I ever consider self-publishing or always traditional publishing? For me, it was about giving traditional publishing a go first, because relatively speaking, I did get a deal within a certain time frame. It wasn't 15 years I was trying. Would I have eventually? Probably, because the first book that I ended up writing was so meaningful to me. It was an experience about a 16-year-old girl who is struggling with binge eating disorder, and there aren't many books for teenagers. In fact, I don't know any in Australia that deal with that particular eating disorder, and it's very, very common. And so to me, that was such an important book to have in the world that I probably would have tried to self-publish it, and whatever the outcome, if it had been one teenager who'd read it and felt less alone. And that's why I would have gone down that self-publishing route. But yeah, I didn't have to in the end. But yeah, there's so many people that take that route, and I understand why, because when you want your book out in the world, that's the most important thing to you, and it's a wonderful path to take.
Thank you.
And one of the things that you talked about that you got the greatest value from was the commentary from your editor. So if you self-publish, you actually miss that step, don't you? And I'm interested what your thoughts about actually missing that step by self-publishing. How does it balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people who self-publish will hire their own editor, so anyone can do that at any time. And you might pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, something like that, to have an editor have a look at your book and give you feedback and that sort of thing, or more. So you still can go through that process, and I would suggest that to anyone. Of course, it costs money, so that's difficult. So yeah, because writing and editing are not the same skill set. I've written for my entire life, and it is such a different skill set. So to put a book out in the world that hasn't been touched by a professional editor, that's going to read differently than a book that's been edited professionally. So a lot of people still go down that path, but invaluable to me to see my book through someone else's eyes, and to get to rework it in that way. So yeah, it is great to work with a professional.
Thanks, Miranda. Anyone else got any questions? Someone right down the back there.
I'm interested in the query letter that you might have sent to the publishers, and how important was that?
Well, Luke, you had went through. Kate actually got asked to write a book. Luke sent his book. You didn't get to the point of sending a query letter, and you were shortlisted for a prize. So
we're very lucky. None of us have written a query letter, which is the worst part.
Yeah. So none of these authors have written query letters. But have you got any tips?
Well, can I just say, to sort of cover both of those in a way, so with my second manuscript, I did seek out, and I wasn't intending to self-publish at that time, but just to get some feedback for that exact reason, I did work with a freelance editor who was very good. They gave me lots of feedback. It was a difficult book. It was a complex book that was a difficult read, dealt with some pretty dark subjects and things in fiction. But so I found with that it was really helpful in a lot of ways, but because I wasn't committed to the process, as in when Affirm acquired my manuscript, whether I liked it or not, I was dealing with the editors who made it so much better, as Miranda and Kate have said. And my agent said to me at the time where that was happening, they all want the same. Number one, they've got a totally different skill set and they know what they're doing, and you don't, basically, Luke. So put your ego back in its box and go away. And secondly, they all want the same thing. They want it to be the best book it can be. They want it to be accessible by the most people. They want it to be widely read. They don't want it to be to have criticisms that are unnecessary if they can iron them out. So I went through that process, and it became what it became, and it became so much better. But when I had the freelance editor, and so I was very interested, but because her feedback was probably very similar when I look back, but I was in a situation where I didn't have to take it on, and it was just too hard at that point to change it, and I'd already started another manuscript, so I just shelved that. So I think, yeah, if you're going to go down that path, it's difficult to take on the feedback, but very much worthwhile. And in terms of the query letter, I think, they're difficult. That's another skill in itself, and probably you guys are better off answering that than me. Writing, I even found when I looked at submitting, which I never did, but putting a 300-word synopsis on a 90,000-word book, I just didn't know where to start. I mean, it's a really difficult thing, and I think someone with training in writing is probably going to be much better at that than
You have to be really, really clear about what your book's about. Have you got something to say there, Kate?
Oh, again, I'm still kind of in the dark about the whole publishing process, to be honest. But I know that most of the major publishing houses do have specific submission days, maybe twice a year. So if you look on their websites, they will say, we're taking submissions for adult fiction on this day or kids fiction on whatever day. So that might be handy for you to look up those days and fit in with their deadlines and just write the shit out of that, whatever it is that you're pitching.
Yeah, and there's lots of writers' centres that will have advice on their websites about how to write a query letter, like Writers Victoria, Australian Society of Authors. You'll see some advice about that there. Anyone else got any questions? Someone over here?
How many drafts of your manuscript did you do prior to getting it to the point that they sent it back to you to rewrite?
So for my first book, I did 2 major drafts. And interesting what you're saying, Kate, before, is the first draft was one where I wasn't being honest with myself. I wasn't writing the experience I really wanted to talk about. I was sugarcoating it, and I was essentially lying to myself, and thought I could get away with writing a story with heart that wasn't really true. So to me, there was 2 versions. There was that, and then there was a version of, okay, I'm going to have to say the real stuff here, and I'm going to have to dig deep. And that was the second version, and all of them had little tweaks and sort of as I went along. So for me, there were 2 big drafts, but I think it varies so much.
I would have had probably 4, and they're not complete rewrites. They're, first draft done, leave it for a month, read it probably 3 times in a week or 2, and just change the obvious bits initially. I feel like it's kind of like sandpapering with a rough bit first. But the problem was I kept adding words. I wasn't taking any away. So that's where the process that I eventually had to go through was so beneficial. Like I'd see a bit that was good, but I thought I could make it better, and so it might have been better in some ways, but it just got more complex and more huge. So, yeah, I would have said 4 times I had been through it to get it to the point that was ostensibly good enough to be acquired, but then needed the complete overhaul that it got.
But you're revising as you're writing, though, aren't you? I mean, you've still there's the complete redrafts, and then there's the rewriting as you're going, isn't there? So that a lot of people will say that, a lot of authors will say that writing is rewriting. So you're getting out your first draft, and then you're revising it and you're rewriting it, and then there's the draft again. Would you say that?
Yeah, mine were definitely just, when I was doing it on my own, definitely just, revising on the run. So each chapter might have a little, a paragraph or 2 changed or deleted, or a plot point no longer fitted because something else changed later on. So they were, I'd class them as reasonably minor changes, really, certainly compared to what happened when it got real. Yeah.
Some people say that the first draft is sort of the story, and the second draft's getting the voice right too. Were you going to say something there, Kate?
Just that I've had friends who are journalists who've taken 9, 10, 11 drafts to get what is eventually a book. So my advice would just be don't be discouraged. If you actually think you've got something to say and you want to say it and you're enjoying the process and you're hating the process, if you're actually hating it, it's a sign you're doing something right, I reckon, because it's getting to you. So keep going.
No pain, no gain.
Yeah.
Anyone else got any questions? We have someone right down the back there.
Thanks. It probably piggybacks off that question as well. And Luke, when you were saying about when you hit that like 30,000 words and you're just really stuck and, struggling to keep going, would you recommend just keep writing through that or revisiting the story from the start? And I guess when you're doing that first draft, do you reread your story from the start and give it a little edit in the process, or do you recommend just getting it through and then going through that process?
Yeah, good question. I know there's so many different opinions on this. My way is, because I've got so many notes, so even though it changes a lot as I go, I've always got them to fall back on. So I feel comfortable that, and I don't really have the ending in mind when I start necessarily, and even if I do, it changes anyhow as I go. But I think, if I was getting to that kind of early to mid stage, it's either going to say to me that the story itself either isn't strong enough yet or you don't know it well enough yet. So in that sense, my approach would be to give it some time and space and construct the story better in my head or in a very short form before I then went back to it. So I knew I was heading towards where it needed to go, would be how I would do it. But if I have these chunks of time where I'll write for, a lot of words in 4 weeks, sometimes I won't get back to it for a few months. So I definitely will reread it multiple times before I go again. But yeah, I think definitely, again, being patient and letting the story come to you. I think if the story is just good enough, I feel like that's when you struggle to write the entirety of it. So making sure the story has enough nuance to it and just being patient.
You had 4 months between that first draft and the second draft, so you put it aside for 4 months, Kate?
Yeah, just put it aside and let everything calm down, literally had to wrestle with my ego. It wasn't so much that I needed to work out what did I want to say, but how did I want to say it, and was I able to be honest enough? It was finding that authenticity. But, my advice to anyone who wants to write is absolutely do it. Have in mind that sentence, what I want to say is, and then imagine that you're talking to your best girlfriend. Just do that. I don't ever edit as I go along. I literally wrote my 72,000 words without editing any of it. It was just, would pick up where I left off and go from there. And some chapters poured out of me in an hour. I wrote 2,000 words in an hour, sobbing often during that time. But for me, the process really is write in the voice as if you are talking to your best friend, and don't self-edit as you go, because then you're going to change this word and this line rather than just letting the story come out of you, because the editor can fix up language and things like that. Just you need to get your story out.
I think the other thing I'd say too is I don't think you can get it wrong. It's your story. So, persisting with it and sitting with it until I think when you really want to get back to write it is when you've got that next bit of an idea that is going to be the right one, is how I'd say.
Thank you.
I would just
Miranda?
also say there is nothing like finishing a manuscript. You will trick yourself into writing the first 20 or 30,000 words over and over and over, and I've been there. It's not finishing a book. That's what that isn't.
It's creative avoidance.
There's nothing like finishing the first manuscript and then getting an idea. So I'd say do anything you can to get. Promise yourself you will get to the end. Don't rewrite. And maybe I'll write a different book because maybe this isn't working. That's not true. You're just avoiding the hardest bit, which is the middle and the end. So all this stuff and take your time and be kind to yourself and be patient. But there's nothing like finishing the thing. Most people will never finish the first draft. They'll never do it. And if you don't do that, you can't write the book. So just promise yourself you'll finish the first draft.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry, I've only ever cried a few times in my life. One was Ted Whitten's funeral. One was the birth of my 2 children and my marriage.
What funeral? Sorry.
Ted Whitten's. I'm a Bulldogs supporter.
Oh, right.
And the birth of the children, my marriage day, and finishing my first draft.
Yeah.
It's huge.
It's
true. It was
so huge.
first draft of first manuscript.
We've got another question down the end there.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating. I'd like your opinion about using artificial intelligence from the perspective, okay, so some of my academic friends are telling me that when they have to write an article, they won't look at the word limit, they'll just, let it come out and say what they want to say. Then they put it into something like chat and say, reduce this to 5,000 words or whatever. Then they become the editor and they edit what chat has done to their work. So I'm just curious, and the second part of it is, when I published my first children's book, I paid an editor in New York several $1,000s, and I think she made more money than I ever made, but the point was I still got it out. Anyway, that was two questions in a way.
So you're asking about AI, is good? Yeah. Have you got any opinions about AI here?
Yeah, I think the big question is, why are you writing? So for an academic piece, or if you're writing because it's, part of your job, or I'm a copywriter, or if you're a journalist, you've got to ask yourself why. So when I write fiction, I'm writing to figure out what I think. I'm writing to live a more examined life. I'm writing to connect to something within myself that will therefore connect with the reader. So I would never use AI for that, because it defeats the whole purpose. I'm not even doing the same thing. It's not the same sport, Whereas I copyright, that's part of my job as well. I might do an annual report for a law firm, right? Would I use AI for that? Yeah, probably, because it's going to be helpful, it's going to be more efficient, that sort of thing. Obviously, there's all sorts of ethical concerns and that, but just talking about, the academic friend and then, say, the fiction writer, if you're really writing for the reasons that I'm a writer from the heart, you probably wouldn't consider using AI, because you're not going to get what you want out of the process.
I think that's brings us to the end of this session, and I'd like you to thank our wonderful panellists for a really engaging discussion.
And thanks to you, Abigayle. You're amazing.
Thank you, Kate.
I have loved this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kate and Luke and Miranda will be going downstairs for book signings, and with the Dimmicks pop-up store. And all their books can be purchased down there. So thank you again, and thank you to the audience as well.